Welcome everyone, and welcome Simon. It's really a huge pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for having accepted this invitation to speak to us. So just a few words to introduce you. I don't want to take away from your time, but it's really an honor that you should be here. So Simon is an advocate for the UN Women UK Association, and he used to be developmental officer for it, and he is a policy analyst in the UN Women Economic Empowerment Division in New York. Simon is also a strategist for the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and he holds a master's in public policy from Cambridge. He's a very active proponent, an eloquent speaker about all issues gender related. I've actually listened to a few of his YouTubes, and I can see that indeed he's someone who will hopefully engage us in discussion. And I would like to ask everyone in the audience to ask questions through the Q&A in the Zoom. I just wanted to say a few words about today. I mean, obviously, today's a special day, International Women's Day. And right now is a special time, sadly. We're still in the midst of this pandemic. It's having an impact on everyone, and it's definitely having an impact on women. And this is what Simon, I think, will be telling us a little bit about, and hoping that indeed, as we come out of the pandemic, life will be better. Out of every crisis, there are opportunities that I think we can rise up to. But in my experience, in times of crisis, it's usually the women who indeed do tend to be the ones that suffer, particularly in the less favored parts of this world. So I think I just want to highlight one of the quotes from Simon that I've heard, which is that we need to reframe our narrative about gender equality, because it really does benefit everyone. And here at the EMBL, we really care about that. We have a very active Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. We're developing our strategy. We've organized a couple of meetings, one about the impact of COVID on women, and also another one on gender in academia. And we'd love to be able to exchange with you, Simon, about your experience and get your advice and input. And we would really appreciate following this up in many different ways, because EMBL is a young and dynamic organization who would like to rise up to the challenges that we face today. And sadly, they're not getting that much easier, but we have lots of energy, and I'm sure that you will be very helpful in some of the messages that you're going to give us today about what we should be thinking about. So I just want to finish by thanking the people who actually organized today's seminar. So the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and Roshni, Eileen, and Sarah and others are present. The Science and Society manager, so Lucia Van Breda, and also the Staff Association of EMBL. So on behalf of all of us, welcome Simon, and we really look forward to hearing you.
Thank you so much, Edith, for that incredibly kind introduction, and a huge happy International Women's Day to everyone on the call. There are lots of reasons to mark International Women's Day that I'll be coming to later in the presentation, but also one of the important reasons is to mark extraordinary women. And Edith, yourself as a leader of EMBL and much of your career, and also so many of the women that have organized this call today, I salute you. This is a really important discussion, and really it is absolutely my honor and privilege to be here. So thank you very much for asking me. And thank you so much to everyone who has joined this call. I know the past 12 months, it has been a lot of looking at people bobbing heads on screens, as we've done a lot of our work remotely. So I appreciate you taking time out of your day to join me, join Edith and the team on International Women's Day 2021. But before I kind of get into the substance of today's talk, I just wanted to give a bit more of an introduction to myself and UN Women actually as well. So as I said, it's absolutely brilliant to be with you today. And It is International Women's Day, but one of the questions that I often get is around my gender, and around you may notice that I am a man, and why I may be sort of passionate about these issues and talking about these issues, and really passionately supporting UN Women's mission. I often get asked this question, and I always feel the need to kind of give a sort of robust response. And always I say that I have two broad motivations for doing this work. The first is I was sick and tired of gender equality being framed as a women's issue, to be discussed by women, solved by women, and fought for by women, when most of the issues lie with men, with masculinity, my gender. So whether that is on issues of domestic violence, whether that is inequality in the workplace, my gender has a big role to play in that. And we mustn't focus on fixing the women. We must focus on working together as equals to find long-term solutions to many of these issues. So that's the first reason. And secondly, it is a deep, firmly held belief that equality for women is progress for everyone, including men. So whether that is men who are more able to talk openly about their emotions, pursue non-traditional career paths such as nursing or primary education, be more open about their sexuality, or even spend more time with their children. If women have equality, men get equality, everyone benefits. And that's why I'm so excited to speak to you today, and why it's an absolute privilege to talk to you about many of the issues around International Women's Day today. UN Women, for those of you who don't know, we did some research a couple of years ago, and we found out that UN Women was the organization that you felt that you should have heard of, that you haven't. And that is probably a lot to do with the fact that we are a UN agency. We have the UN brand, the influence, we are HQ'd in New York and all the rest of it. But we were only actually founded in 2010. So if you think of other UN agencies like UNICEF, the one that you'll be most familiar with at EMBL, which is the World Health Organization, these agencies were found over 70 plus years ago. UN Women was only founded 10 years ago. We are the baby of the UN. We are 1% the size of UNICEF. And I'd love to give you some big, elaborate technical reason for this. But in reality, it's because the world is only just waking up to gender equality and women's rights. But critically, while we are a global organization, we operate in countries around the world, we cannot do it alone. Firstly, because we don't have the kind of funding and resource to do it alone in some form of kind of top-down way in terms of the equality movement, but because real change happens in partnership. Real cultural change happens bottom up, by activists, by managers, by people in different organizations. And the same lesson applies at EMBL. I can give you lots of lessons and case studies and evidence from around the world, but ultimately change must start with you. Change must start with you, because only you know your organization, the makeup of it, the cultural dynamics of it, and only with your leadership and your activism can you create that change. So UN Women, as I said, has been around for 10 years. We work in partnership, and we also work at every level of change. So we deliver programs on the ground for women and girls who are in particularly vulnerable situations, and the pandemic has exposed that over the past year. We also work with organizations to influence policies and practices within them, but also to change behaviors and attitudes. But we also take the learnings from the programs and the engagement with community and business leaders to influence policy and legislation at the highest level. And obviously, you guys know, as an international member state organization, in the same way that we do, that really big, robust international change can happen when you work together and influence that policy and legislation. So that's a bit of background to my motivations, to me, and to UN Women. But now, diving into the conversation and the discussion topic today, I'm now going to hope that technology serves me well and try and share my screen. So if you give me a moment. Hopefully you can all see that. I will continue talking unless I get a sudden call out to stop. But so today I really want to, the title of the talk is From Crisis to Recovery, Achieving an Equal Future in a Post-COVID World. And today I really want to do three things. So firstly, I want to explore some of the major challenges over the past 12 months. It's been an incredibly difficult, challenging time for everyone, including those on this call, with such a vast array of inequality challenges taking place. And I want to try and distill some of those challenges, and particularly the impact on women and gender equality. But secondly, I want to look at the action that governments, businesses, and individuals can take, and specifically looking at action that can be taken at EMBL, including allyship and the role that that can play in terms of driving change. But then finally, I want to give, I'm forever an optimist, and I do want to give a few final words of optimism. It has been a difficult time, but I really do believe this could be a hugely important and powerful moment where we realize that we should have a more inclusive and equal future. So firstly, looking at the challenges. As you will all know, way more even than I will, COVID-19 was initially looked at as a health crisis. It is primarily a health crisis. It is a virus that has ravaged many countries around the world, and it has been an incredibly difficult time. But while it has been a health crisis, it has also been a crisis of equality. And while we looked at the virus, as a phrase that was often used in the UK was the great leveler, i.e., it didn't matter who you were, you could clinically catch the virus. But in reality, the differences in people's experiences, challenges, risks has meant that the pandemic has exposed and exacerbated inequalities. It has affected people very, very differently. And that's what I want to call out today. And it has affected people differently in three main ways. Firstly, health. The most important thing of all that we must not remember is over the past 12 or so months, we have lost 1.3 million mothers, sisters, daughters. And while this is a really huge figure and a really big statistic, behind every single number is a tragedy, it's a life, it's fear, it's hope, it's anxiety. It's a family that has lost somebody that's really, really important to them. And this is a really important thing to remember. But even more so, we need to remember that it hasn't just been completely equal in terms of who has got the virus and who has sadly died from the virus. We need to consider intersectional differences. So for example, Black women are 4 times more likely to have caught the virus and sadly died from the virus. But the health implications go even further. 70% of frontline health workers around the world are women. Not only does that mean that women are on the front line of this crisis in an incredibly difficult and stressful set of circumstances, but it means that there are mental health implications. huge mental health implications. As I said, anxieties that have been driven by the fact that women are really have been on the front line of this crisis. And as I said, you know, these are kind of big statistics, very, very difficult numbers to read. But behind every statistic is a story. And there's so many stories that I know many people will have from their families, but also in different countries around Europe, Germany, France, Spain, etc. Linda Adigbala is a recent case in the UK that I always keep very close to my heart. A 66-year-old nurse, extraordinary woman who was so ambitious and compassionate and awe-inspiring as a nurse that she inspired all of her family to go and be a nurse and go into the medical profession. And she sadly passed away in responding to the crisis itself. So it's been a very, very difficult time in terms of health. But there have also been other impacts on women and other diverse groups. Secondly, safety. Before the pandemic, 250 million women in the 12 months running up to it had experienced domestic abuse. In the UK and in European countries across Europe, the number of reported incidents of domestic violence has gone up by 50%, often more. We've had data released today by UN Women that shows 1 in 6 women have experienced intimate partner violence during the pandemic around the world. This is shocking stuff. And this is only the violence that we know about. Reports of violence are often underreported by up to 90%. And particularly in the case of domestic abuse, women will often experience 23 incidents of it before they actually report it. This is what we call at UN Women, the shadow pandemic. This is what has been going on behind closed doors. And these are the real implications of lockdown and other policies. And we knew this would happen at UN Women. Whether it was Zika, Ebola, or other pandemics, when societies are under stress, women suffer. And this has absolutely been shown throughout the pandemic as well. So we've had health challenges, we've had challenges around violence and safety, but finally the challenges are around work. 60% of the informal economy are women. Women are 25% more likely to live in extreme poverty around the world. But also in terms of the sectoral challenges, the sectors that are disproportionately have women in them, for example, hospitality, tourism, etc., have been closed down, have faced insecurity, instability, and challenges with wages. But there have also been challenges exposed in terms of the disproportionate burden of care. So there are 16 billion hours of unpaid care work delivered a year, and women do 75% of those. Women do 3 times as much domestic care work as men. And this is one of the key stresses, but barriers to workplace progression. And so in the workplace, and as we emerge from this, this is going to be the really big challenge that women and other diverse groups face. And what all of this means is that before the pandemic, it was estimated that it would take 100 years to achieve gender equality. So whether that was through educational attainment, political representation, equality in the workplace, we thought it would take 100 years to achieve gender equality. But because of the impact of the virus, it looks like it might set us back 25 years. 25 years of gender equality progress could be lost. And so this goes to the nub of it. COVID-19 has not caused these inequalities. It is not the the thing. It is not the camel that's broken. It's not the straw that's broken the camel's back, to use a terrible British proverb. In terms of equality, it has simply exposed these challenges. It has exacerbated these challenges. And unless we act now, we might lose so much of the progress that we've gained. And this quote from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, perfectly captures this sentiment. COVID-19 could reverse the progress that has been made on gender equality. Women's leadership must be at the heart of resilience and recovery efforts. So while we have all of these challenges, while it's been an incredibly difficult time, this has really exposed so many of these inequalities. And now this could be a huge window of opportunity for real, sustainable, long-term change. So what do we need to do about this? Everyone has a role to play, and the whole world must come together. Gender inequality is an incredibly difficult, complex, wicked problem that is hard to solve, but we all have skin in the game. Governments have a role to play, working together to change policy and legislation. And governments can do 3 things right now. 1, governments can urgently prioritise women's safety. So as I've said, there are huge challenges around safety, around domestic violence and abuse, in terms of all the different types of domestic violence and abuse, not only in terms of intimate violence within the home, but also financial coercion and other forms of violence as well. So urgently prioritizing women's safety is really important, including considering specialist services, for example, for women who are more likely to experience violence, such as ethnic minority women, homeless women, migrant women, and women of diverse sexualities. Secondly, representation. Listen to women's voices. We need to be doing more as governments to collect data, both quantitative data, but also qualitative data, to understand women's true lived experiences. We mustn't presume things. We must actually get women involved in building policy. We must be listening to those voices, and we must be doing this on an ongoing basis. And only by then, only with that, can we begin to actually respond to women's needs as well. And thirdly, we must be designing policies that actually respond to women's economic reality. So whether that's about maternity pay, whether that's about work flexibility, whether that's about childcare. If we don't actually have policies that respond to women's actual experiences, challenges, risks, and include women who have intersecting identities, so women of diverse ethnicities, sexualities, abilities, unless we actually begin to listen and then respond to these policies, women will always be held back by the policy and legislative framework within which we exist. That's what governments can do right now. But secondly, businesses and community leaders also must step up to the plate. And EMBL, and I'll come to specifics around the organization in a sec, but operates in this kind of really interesting intersection between influencing government policy and also being a community leader within its own right. But there are 3 things that you can do right now. 1, demonstrate bold leadership. So whether that is in terms of talking about these issues, and that's why it's so fantastic that we're talking about these today, raising awareness about them, role modeling true inclusive values where we promote women's leadership and we talk in open, inclusive terms. We need to be doing all of that. But we also need to not just be talking the talk, but actually investing in these issues. Not seeing diversity and inclusion as a separate HR problem to fix, but as an absolutely critical part of how organizations operate and strategize. And so that's a really, really important piece. But secondly, workplace, reimagining the workplace. So actually using this as an opportunity to think differently. Do we need to go into the office all the time? Can we work more flexibly? Are there cultural practices that maybe we can slightly change? Are there support services, for example, domestic abuse support services, sexual and reproductive health services, that maybe we may need to invest in our employees, or even in research around? Reimagining how the world could be different when we perhaps do get back into the workplace, or we do think about the new normal in terms of the organization. But finally, community. Not just thinking about how you can influence the colleagues in the organization, not just thinking about how you can influence clients, so people that use your research and your other services, but actually how you can influence the communities. Because what we've realized about the pandemic is we are only as strong as the communities we serve. And so organizations that we've been working with at UN Women have been doing huge amounts to offer their time, talent, or treasure to actually respond to some of these community issues. So for example, we've worked with hotels that provide safe refuges for women who are escaping violence. We've worked with telecommunications companies to give women free credit and free phones, free phones, so that they can actually call up certain helplines if they need them in terms of refuges, etc. And that's exactly the sort of community mindset that you should apply to so many of these problems. For example, it may be around some of the as I said, the research that you do as an organization. But critically, it's about looking across the value chain, not just looking at value in terms of how you improve inclusion internally, not even just in terms of how you serve your clients externally, but looking at the big broad picture and going, what unique role do we have to play as an organization to drive us towards this more equal future? So leadership, workplace, community. And then finally, individuals have a huge role to play, being activists, being advocates in their families and in their communities. We all have a role to play. And actually, this is where the pandemic has had some positive benefits. People are beginning to use their voice more, be more aware, and really begin to understand how their role can actually influence change in the future. And so there's three things that individuals and activists can do. One, use your voice. Activism starts at home. So whether that is around the dinner table, in terms of children or family members or friends, have these conversations. Not necessarily in sort of big corporate kind of academic terms per se, but just in terms of having open conversations about, for example, if your daughter wants to join the rugby team and why there may be challenges around that because of stereotypes, or why your son might want to be a nurse and yet there's challenges around those sorts of stereotypes. Beginning to have these open conversations and raising awareness. And International Women's Day is a great, great moment to do that. So use your voice. Where you see inequality, where you see injustice, you can have an important role in changing that. Secondly, data. Please share your insights with us. On our website, unwomenuk.org, there is a survey to fill in about your experiences over the pandemic. And there's also other workshops that we're running to get your voices heard. We use that data, we use that experience to take it directly to government. And so by becoming part of a movement, by using your voice in terms of getting involved with us, we really can begin to influence some of that change at the highest level. So use your share your insights. But then finally, charity starts at home. You can influence the change. Today, I very much hope is the beginning of our conversation together. There are so many amazing resources, tools, ideas from around the world that we can share with you for you to influence change in your team, in your community. So you can really start to be the leader in terms of creating more of an inclusive culture in your workplace as well. So voice, data, and change. So each of these actors has a huge role to play. And unless everyone steps up to the plate, we will not begin to narrow that gap and ensure that we do not have to wait 100+ years for gender equality. But I was also thinking this morning about some specific lessons that I wanted to share with your organization about how you can really apply some key principles to how you think about some of these issues. As I've said at the top, EMBL can take bold, decisive action to advance equality internally and in the community it serves. So I've written, if you like, a couple of letters to different people on this call. And I've got 3 lessons for each. The first one is to all leaders and managers. You must invest in inclusion as business critical. I mentioned this before, but the challenges of really shifting the dial on this stuff always come when HR, who do an amazing job to kind of get these causes up the agenda, are often not necessarily given the resources to invest in the business, but also don't work fully in partnership with the rest of the business. Ultimately, diversity and inclusion is something that should be imperative to the strategy of an organization. Not just to make sure that you have a more representative workforce, you're more productive, you're more innovative, and all of the positive benefits of diversity and inclusion that have been well spoken about for many years, but also to ensure that you are serving not just your clients, but the communities and your users effectively. People often say to me, you know, talk to me more about the moral reason for why we should have equality. Obviously, the moral reason and the ethical reason is there in terms of ensuring that women and other diverse groups have the full opportunities that they should do and should be able to reach their potential. But also, it's bad governance. If you don't have full representation at every level of the organization, it is bad governance. You do not have as good decision making because you are not able to challenge assumptions, understand necessarily different perspectives, and really begin to get everyone's voices at the table. And so rather than something that necessarily happens in isolation, in silo, in a separate part of the business, it should be something that is embedded in your marketing department, in your research department, in your sales department, in whatever department it might be, to really make sure that you begin to embed these pieces and see it as something that is entirely critical. And you've already done some amazing work on this, and yeah, I've been absolutely delighted to be speaking with Roshni and Sarah about these issues. So I know that you've done a huge amount of work on this already, but I just wanted to remind you of that really important principle. Secondly, listen, learn, and act. In a lot of the discussion around inclusion, around equality, there's lots of incredible data and evidence out there and tools and methodologies. And don't get me wrong, UN Women have lots of those, and I'd be delighted to share those. But ultimately, it comes down to a very simple principle. It's all about institutionalizing the ability of leaders and managers and colleagues across the organization to listen to people's experiences, learn about people's experiences and act on any areas that they may have specific challenges and risks. But I put the onus on the word listen. Listen. That is often the bit that we forget. So I know that you might do an employee engagement survey, but actually really doing and investing in a listening exercise to understand people's different intersecting experiences, doing focus groups, having reverse mentoring. So that's, for example, where people more junior in the organization will actually mentor people more senior in the organization about the issues that are really affecting them. Having really strong, clear listening processes embedded into the organization are really important. And listening isn't a one-off exercise. It is something that should be ongoing. It should be continuous. Listening must as I said, is not a one-off exercise. It is something that must be almost cultural across the organization. And when you listen, you can learn, and then you can act. And that's the process through which you should follow. And finally, you're obviously a big, complex organization that obviously works with many member states and across borders. And what I would say is think global, but act local. Very much in the way that I described with UN Women at the beginning. We have huge amounts to do by learning from each other, sharing evidence, sharing case studies, tackling the big questions. And in the world of molecular biology, you'll be doing exactly that in terms of those principles, in terms of climate change, in terms of the pandemic and the vaccination programs. We must think global. They are global challenges. We must work together. We must collaborate. Absolutely. But we must also act and deliver these changes locally, particularly some of these incredibly difficult, wicked cultural problems that take a long time to shift. You know your teams, you know your organization better than anyone else does. And so you understand where are the spaces where people feel safe discussing these issues. What is the communication with which people will respond most effectively? Think global, act together, share resources, share ideas, but ultimately have accountability for delivering that change at the local level, either in terms of in countries or within functions and teams across the organization. And when you apply these principles, it can be done. You can achieve change effectively and quickly. Where there's a will, there's a way. Bob Moritz, who's the chair of PwC, he's one of our He for She champions. He for She is one of our global campaigns to get men and all genders involved in the equality debate. And we've got lots of organizations that are signed up, both in the public and the private sector, from the police to universities, etc., etc. But I just wanted to pull out this example because I think it really captures the point well. PwC increased representation of women on their global leadership team from 18% to 47% in just 15 months. We worked with them. They were one of our He for She champions, and I can share resources clearly of how they did that afterwards. But the point is, where there is a will, there is a way. If you want to prioritize this and invest in it, you can achieve change quickly. And PwC have done this, but other organizations that you may think may have had even more challenges. For example, 45 police forces across the UK have signed up to He for She and are really committing to increase representation as well. And there are many other examples around Europe too. So these are really, really important lessons as well. But I also have 3 lessons for allies, including men. I said this in my introduction. Unless we have allyship, unless we have men and all genders coming together to achieve this change, we will not see that long-lasting change. And so I'm a man and I'm speaking to you on International Women's Day. And so from my personal experience, I say to all allies at the organization, whether it's men who stand in solidarity with women, whether it is people who are white who stand in solidarity with people of color, whether it is the non-LGBTQ community who stands in solidarity with the LGBTQ plus community. Allyship is essential. It's essential for standing in solidarity. And I give three key lessons. One, believe in the benefits. As I said at the beginning, equality for women is progress for everyone, including men. And I know there'll be some men on this call who are already doing incredible stuff to make the workplace more inclusive. And this is all about sharing the word. That for too long, the narrative around gender equality has been something that is for women to explore. It's a kind of women's thing. It's a women's issue. It's not. There are women's issues, and our role within that is not to talk for women. It is to amplify women's voices. But also, we must really stand with confidence and say that equality for women benefits everyone. Our sons, our daughters. We need to believe in the benefits. Two, own your education. I guarantee that if you go up to somebody at work and you actually show a positive, respectful interest in their experiences and their identities, they will respond positively. But for too long, women have had to fight their fight. They've had to fix their problems. They've had to speak out and educate and do all of those things that are important and amazing, but they are really quite exhausting as well. And so it's so important for men and other people who see themselves as allies to own your education, read up on these issues. A really important book that I would strongly encourage all men to read is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. It is a brilliant, data-driven, evidence-based book that captures perfectly how we've got to a point of institutional inequalities. Highly recommend reading. So own your education. And then finally, and simply, don't be a bystander. Stand up and say something. See something, say something. I always use an example in my personal life, which is a WhatsApp group that I've been on for years since I was an undergraduate student. I don't know if anyone else sort of relates to this, but on this group, it's all men. And occasionally there will be a comment on there that is not necessarily malicious or meant to be kind of cruel. It's just perhaps a sexist comment that somebody wasn't even aware of. But rather than kind of having too much confrontation, I call it out. And because I'm a friend, they listen to me. They trust me. And then they act differently. And so within all of the communities at work, at home, that we are involved in, don't be afraid. You are the person to see something. You are the person to say something. And only with you taking that responsibility can we begin to shift the dial on some of these behaviors. And so I noticed, to sort of finish off this piece, on your website, just the most incredibly powerful and inspiring words about EMBL's role in the world. And you describe yourself as Europe-wide, global impact, infinite curiosity. And then there's another piece here. EMBL works with partners in the biological sciences to unravel the mysteries of life. And that is honestly such a beautiful statement and vision that goes to the very, very simple heart of what I am trying to say. The thing that makes humanity beautiful is our differences. We should be celebrating our differences. But before we do that, we need to understand our differences. And so to truly live up to this amazing vision that you talk about and you act upon in your everyday work, we need to make sure that we are including all of those mysteries of life, all of those mysteries. And if we really truly achieve that vision, which goes perfectly in line with the points around equality and inclusion, not only will we discover more, but everyone at EMBL and around the world will be more prosperous for it. And so finally, I just wanted to give a sense of optimism. I've shared lots of very difficult statistics. It has, of course, been a very difficult year, but I do have a sense of optimism, and I have that for 3 reasons. 1, we are having the conversation on issues from inequality in the workplace to domestic violence and abuse. We are finally beginning to be aware of these situations. So whether it is people who might have got insecure work on the streets, whether it is people in the neighborhood who might have experienced violence, we're beginning to have more of an open conversation about some of these challenges. The Black Lives Matter movement over the summer, which was incredibly energizing and huge in terms of activism. That was another piece where people really began to have a conversation and said, I want to be part of that conversation. And gender equality is no different. And there's a huge conversation that is happening on social media today. And I strongly encourage you to be part of it. IWD, hashtag IWD 2021. Secondly, men are getting engaged. He for She, as I mentioned before, is our big global campaign started by Emma Watson in 2014. And we've launched He for She at Home, which is all about getting fathers and brothers and other men involved in these conversations. I strongly encourage you to go on the He for She website to get involved. But really, this is so amazing to see men beginning to go, oh, I've been in lockdown with my wife. I had no idea about the barriers that she faced that I didn't in my workplace. These conversations are happening and men are really getting engaged and beginning to say, actually, we need to be doing something about this. But finally, we're using our imaginations. From the vaccine program to the social protection schemes, we've had what it's called the furlough scheme, which has been paying people's wages during the pandemic over the past 12 months. There has been a whole range of different policy areas where we thought differently, outside the box. And that obviously goes to the heart of your values as an organization, pushing the boundaries, pushing the frontiers, trying to research and find things that are new and exciting. And now we need to apply that to the equality challenges. We need to think differently, but we have a window of opportunity to do this right now. And so just to finish off, I really am so delighted to have spent International Women's Day 2021 with you. We say at UN Women that this is the time for generation equality. This is the time for generation equality. It must be the time. And thank you so much for spending today with me once again. And so just to finish off before I hand over for Q&A, just very quickly to say 5 key actions that you can take right now. So 1, go to UN Women UK. You can complete an online survey and get involved in our workshops that are all about the biggest equality challenges that are happening, not only in the UK, but we're using that to influence change in Europe and across the world. As I said, number 2, sign up to our workshops. We would love to have you involved, and particularly giving some of those perspectives in different European countries as well. 3, engage your husbands, sons, brothers and friends in our He for She at Home campaign. As I said, this is a moment to get men and all genders talking about these issues. 4, stay in touch at UN Women UK. Get on social media if you're on social media today, IWD 2021. And 5, if you do have time and money to support, we would love you either to sign up as volunteers, and you'll find that on our website, but also donating just £15 can provide essentials for a woman during quarantine, during our COVID pandemic response. And simply to finish, over the past 12 months, we have seen some extraordinary responses, not only in terms of advancing gender equality, but in terms of women's leadership. There have been amazing women leaders effectively responding to this crisis. And Jacinda Ardern really epitomizes this. And I will simply finish with her quote. "We will get through this together, but only if we stick together. Be strong and be kind." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was very inspiring, and despite some of the, well, very negative facts that you showed us, it was extremely positive, and it's great to see, well, a man for a change to talk about these things. So I'm very pleased that I'll be able to host today's Q&A. Just a bit about myself. I'm Ina Huppertz, and I'm a postdoc here at EMBL. And I think this topic really resonates with me in particular, also over the last couple of months, because EMBL has really been working hard to increase gender equality here. And I was able to join EMBL's new mentorship program for female postdocs who get a lot of support from EMBL to make this leap, this next step to join an academic or continue an academic career. But I don't want to take away from the time of answering some questions that I've already lined up. So we have one question from Christina, who I would like to know if you have any idea on how exactly to get more men involved in the conversation and how to get men as allies.
Thank you so much. And some brilliant questions have already come in. Thank you so much, Christina, for your question. It's a really important one. I should also say I've got our house cat next to me, so if I suddenly become distracted at any point, it's not to do with the questions at hand. How to get men more involved in the conversation. So I think that the points I raised during the presentation about allyship are really important. But I think, you know, over and above those pieces, I think it's about sort of two things really. One, it's about really changing the narrative around how gender equality benefits men as well. So I think we have a long way to go on sort of shifting the narrative about that. Men will still think, oh well, not only, you know, how does this affect me? Or actually, it often comes from a really kind of good place, which is, you know, this, I shouldn't be getting involved in this. I don't want to take up space. But actually, if we can really begin to confidently talk about how equality benefits everyone, including men, we can begin to kind of change the mentality around that. But I also think there's a piece about meeting men where they are. And actually a broader principle for life, meeting people where they are. So, you know, if you have a women's network, for example, that might have a session, that's really important in terms of having that shared solidarity and shared experience. But I use an example of whenever we engage with universities and we want to engage men, we might actually do some workshops and campaigns with the rugby club. Because they may be great manbassadors, as we've often called them, for change across campus. And so I think there's a real piece around sort of changing the narrative so that men feel it is a space for them, but also actually considering where to meet them halfway in order to get men involved.
Excellent. So there's another question from Govindarajan. Simon, how do you differentiate between equality and equity when it comes to gender? Which one should we really strive for?
Quite a sort of, I guess, more of a kind of technocratic question. I think so. You know, the way that we generally define equality is in terms of the approach, whereas equity is the outcome. So equality is about understanding people's unique experiences, challenges, and risks so that you can respond to them, ensure that they actually have equal access and opportunity to those opportunities in the workplace, wherever it might be. Whereas equity is more the outcome that we say we've achieved if we're doing that right. You know, there's no, as I said before, you know, particularly, I think this is a really interesting piece for you as a research organization. You know, there's still more to do in terms of data and research. There's still way more to do in terms of listening to those experiences that might hold people back in terms of the equality piece. You know, we're speaking about women, you know, broadly, but as I've mentioned a couple of times, we need to understand more about how, you know, LGBT women see the world, women of diverse abilities see the world, women in different parts of the world see and interact with the world. So equality is the kind of is the process by which everyone can have full opportunity to thrive. Equity is what happens if that's achieved.
I think actually that ties in really well with a question from Jesus, who was asking about, again, the measures that an institution can take. And he's pointing towards increasing paternity leave as an institution. Do you think that could be a good way to promote equality in childcare and support mothers?
This is such a good question, and this goes exactly to the heart of it. You know, this is the policy that we should be discussing across the world. And it's a really good example of how something can benefit women and men and have an influence on gender equality. I would say having shared paid parental leave between men and women is absolutely key. I think it's really important. It gives that flexibility, it gives that choice. But a really interesting, and I do not nearly have 1% of the kind of data and scientific understanding that you guys do, but I will try and show off by saying that the most kind of real life international randomized control trial we have is what happened in Norway when they introduced shared paid parental leave across the genders. And what happened was it found a natural equilibrium at men taking 30% of that paid leave, which I thought was such a fascinating RCT, because it showed that even when you've got that context, there's still not the cultural element following it at the same pace. So what I would say is, yes, really important, but it's not a silver bullet. There's other important things to consider as well.
Thank you very much. Then I have a question from Yara Reeds, who is asking about so first of all, she would like to thank you for this essential and interesting talk. And again, about male awareness and engagement. And I think you've already pointed to a couple, but know of any broader education programs or plans where not only young women, but also young men are fostered and educated and not sidelined?
Absolutely brilliant question, Yara. And this is exactly it, you know, for too long, the focus was on, you know, particularly in the violence against women space, providing refuges, domestic support services, you know, looking at safety in public spaces. And that's really important. But you need to tackle the issues upstream. You need to tackle the issues upstream. And while men, of course, experience domestic violence and abuse, and that's really, really critical, we need to be talking about that as well, it is incredibly disproportionately on women. And so we need to tackle these issues upstream. Through our He for She campaign and through other great campaigns across the world, we are running workshops with men and also boys very, very young. Gender, I always use as an example, as it's very interesting, which is gender stereotypes, norms, and expectations. A lot of people think, you know, they might happen, you know, when you're growing up in secondary school. No, they don't happen when you're 16. They don't happen when you're 11. They don't even happen when you're 5. The gap begins to happen between the ages of 0 and 6 months. There is a research study of these two, these two babies. One's wearing pink, one's wearing blue, and they're in a theatre, and there's a whole crowd watching, and it's a bit of a study that people don't really know what's going on. They're told it's something else. But the 2 ramps are put up, and when the baby in pink crawls up the ramp, the audience goes, oh, maybe put the ramp down, I'll let her off, you know, come on, give her a break. And when the blue baby goes up the ramp, everyone says, oh, go on, you know, push him up. Come on, here we go. Goodness me, get to the top. And it's a slightly absurd study, don't get me wrong, but I do think it goes to the heart of this point, which is we need to make sure that we are educating boys as early as possible to ensure that they understand and have a fully inclusive social and relationship education before we get to the very damaging and costly impacts of not doing something earlier later on the line.
Thank you very much. There's actually kind of related to that, the question on how to do that from Govindarajan. How do you involve children at really early on, as you kind of pointed out, as early as 5 months?
Sorry, which one was this again? Could you just repeat the question?
Yes, so it was basically, how do you involve children in your approach towards equality? So very early on, as you say, maybe like methods to do that. Do you have some tools?
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, UN Women is a huge organisation. There's lots of different tools and examples, but we often find that getting mothers and girls together at certain sessions that we run, so that they can kind of learn and support each other, are really, really important ones. You know, we do a lot of the kind of educational piece around, you know, your rights and accessing your rights and all the rest of it. But actually, it's just a kind of bit of, you know, shared solidarity and community aspect as well. And we always deliver our programs in the communities and with community leaders as well. So yeah, it's about having, it's about kind of doing the workshops, but not, but doing them in the communities you said, but also in partnership with the mothers as well. I think that's a really important piece in terms of the long-term educational impact.
Excellent, thank you. Then we have a sort of different topic from Isabella Malta. She again thanks you for this lovely talk, and she would like to know a little bit more about the confidence gap between men and women, whether you can maybe address that, and how should we address that?
Absolutely, and we only realised a couple of days ago that I actually did my master's at the same time as Isabella did. So we do know each other. So thank you so much for your question, Isabella. And I know we probably discussed this many times before during our master's year. You know, I think the question about the confidence gap, you know, I think there's clearly conversations that can be had in terms of, you know, within women's networks about how we can, you know, how women can support each other to amplify their voices and get these points discussed. But I am always nervous about discussing the kind of confidence gaps. I'm very nervous about the kind of lean-in theories that people will have spoken about before, because often it does put the onus on the women. It assumes that women need to be fixed rather than the systems, the environment, the structures that need to be fixed. So I guess in terms of the confidence gap, the only one that I really identify is the confidence to tell men that they need to get involved in this damn fight, right? That's the only confidence gap that I see. And I appreciate that's a difficult one. And that's why I would say that seeking out men who speak kind of openly about these and with confidence about these issues is the first step. That's how you can get the allyship, the advocacy, and how you can begin to kind of change some of those structural barriers that mean women for too long have thought it's a problem with their confidence rather than necessarily the workplace within which they live.
Thank you very much. Then we have a very relevant question also from Maria Zimmerman. Do you think that there's a way to reach gender and general equality without going through a phase of positive discrimination, like programs or opportunities for women only, or is it necessary to have measures to go through as a society for a generation or two?
It's a really good question, Maria. Thank you so much. And my answer is actually a fairly simple one. It depends on how quickly you want to see change. So, you know, there's been amazing work that's been going on, and, you know, International Women's Day, let's, you know, it is a celebration, and we should, you know, really admire the progress, you know, the shoulders on which we stand of so many feminists and women that have fought this cause for ages. There has been progress. But the key question, as I said, is how quickly we want to see more progress. I gave you the statistic of 100 years. And, you know, I guess my response would be, attitudes do change over time, campaigns do change things, education evolves, attitudes evolve, and we have seen some progress. But I, for one, am quite impatient. I want to see change now. And so I guess for me, the kind of in this world that we live in, where we often have social media debates that become often like culture wars, positive discrimination and quotas and that type of thing is actually almost been the kind of divisive term in this space, and it's often misconstrued. Positive discrimination or quotas or whatever it might be, we describe them as a special temporary measure. And so they are not the be all and end all. They are not the long-term fix to everything. But in organizations and in societies where you are just not seeing progress happen quick enough, where, for example, power structures are so deeply ingrained, they're just a nightmare to kind of shift the dial on, we do recommend a special temporary measure or positive discrimination quota, whatever it might be, to just get some different voices at the table. But look, don't get me wrong, I would love to be in a situation where those weren't needed. But ultimately, the key thing, depending on your context, your organization, your family, whatever it might be, is to think, how much change are we seeing? How long have we waited so far? How quickly do we want to see the change? And then make your course of action accordingly.
Thank you very much. So that kind of leads to a similar question, or along the same lines, from Amani Said. He said, when you consider environments such as academia and university, and you also just pointed that out, which are very traditional, have old patterns, habits, it can be very challenging to change them quickly. So what do you think is the best way to change the system most efficiently? So you already pointed that there are these kind of temporary measures, but maybe you can go into detail a little bit more.
I guess I can say two things. So one, I think it comes back to one of the points I made. I think it has to be invested in as business critical. So, you know, some of the kind of really institutional pieces around this, for example, you know, diversity, inclusion officers reporting to the CEO, you know, there being different kind of inclusion officers that are responsible, that are accountable for different portfolios across the different regions. But you know, investing in this stuff, I know, you know, money is often tight, resources are obviously, you know, constrained, particularly now. But I guess the point is that for too long, diversity and inclusion has been seen as a kind of add-on. And don't get me wrong, a lot of companies during this have gone, oh, you know, the first thing to go is this. But it's about making the case that this isn't just about, you know, doing the right thing. It's critical for the performance of your organization. So I think investing properly in it. I remember when I first started in this role, several years ago, you know, companies were still doing that thing where, you know, people who worked on diversity, it would be a kind of extracurricular activity or something. You know, something that people would do one evening a week, and it would be an event on International Women's Day. You know, we've really progressed since then, but I still think we have a long way to go to kind of take this seriously. You know, in the way that you would invest in any new research project, in any new bit of service provision, you know, you have to make the business case. You have to make the business case for why you should invest in that. And clearly the business case is there for that. So I think there's that piece. But then the other piece is to do what works. While I said that obviously, you know, you need to think global and act local, so deliver things locally, you can learn lessons. And we've got a lot of resources that show what works and what doesn't. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. But for example, unconscious bias training, that many organizations have spent money on over the years, it doesn't really work. You know, it's one of those, it's like a classic thing. People will do it. I think it's really important for information raising, but in all of the evidence that we've gathered and looked at, it's not really that effective. Similarly, diverse selection panels during recruitment was often one where people thought, oh, you know, this makes intuitive sense. This probably, you know, makes sense. Get more women on the panels. We'll probably get more women into certain roles. Again, it's very mixed in terms of how effective this is. Whereas if you have skills-based recruitment, i.e. you ensure that it's not to do with kind of interviews face to face until the last moment. It's to do with kind of what are your skills and how can you test those skills. So whether it's data analysis or, you know, research ideas or whatever it might be. And when you have things like KPIs in performance targets for managers to get these things right, you know, that works. And so I think that was my second bit of advice, is actually looking at kind of the evidence and what works and applying that to the organization as well.
Excellent. I actually have a question myself. You were talking now very much about the local activities that can be done. I think was also, and you pointed that out as well, is to kind of look globally. So sort of in the preparation for your presentation or seminar today, I looked up a little bit about the pay gap between women and men, which is shocking to me. And also like living in Germany, growing up in Germany, where I've always felt like there's quite a bit of equality going on, that there's still 20% difference in pay between men and women. So there are actually countries like Romania and Italy where this gap is very small, actually below 5%. Can you elaborate? Do you know sort of what's different there? What are we still doing wrong? Maybe in countries like Germany and Austria, for example, where the gender pay gap is huge still?
So it's a really, really good question. I don't know the specifics necessarily, but I think there's a really, really important way of thinking about it, which is important around the gender pay gap. Because the thing is with the gender pay gap, you need to think about two forms of inequality. We talk about vertical inequality, but also horizontal. So vertical is the one that people are more in tune with, which is the inequality because of representation, disproportionate representation of men at senior level roles in an organization, conversely to more junior roles. That's vertical inequality. And that's what people are more aware of. It's the horizontal inequality that is often more difficult to measure and respond to, and may well be the kind of reason for some of, you know, maybe the explanatory force behind some of these case studies. Because in the countries that you've mentioned, and in the UK, we have very, very gendered sectors. So if you look, and this has actually been one of the big issues in the UK around the pandemic, construction, which is very male dominated, is obviously disproportionately men, significantly disproportionately men, whereas actually a lot of the sectors that have suffered, like hospitality and tourism, are disproportionately women. So you need to make sure that we're taking that sectoral view, and I guarantee that if you look at the case studies of those countries, that's where the gender pay gap comes through. But while we're discussing this, I wanted to say one other thing as well. There was an important bit of research that came through this morning to us from King's College London and Ipsos Mori, which is one of our biggest polling organisations. And it showed that 50% of people thought the gender pay gap was important to respond to, but it also showed that 20% thought it was political correctness gone too far, and 10% thought it was fake news. So, you know, this is an issue that's been around with us for a few years now, but goodness me, there's still a long way to go. They're good examples. And I think really what goes to the heart, the final thing I'll say on this, comes to the point about delivering locally, as you say, you know, because, you know, without that data, without understanding what's going on in those economies along gender lines, you can't begin to respond and understand those experiences. So basically, it's a really, really good question.
Thank you very much, Simon. Then we have one maybe final question from Roshni. You were talking about the 100 years, and I think the World Economic Forum also predicts that there will be 100 years until this gender gap will be closed. What would be your estimation with your engagement now in this topic? What is your prediction of how long it will actually take?
With conversations like this, 0 years, 0 years. No, come on, we can do it. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's a really, really good question. I really am feeling confident. I think, you know, the level of engagement around these issues is unprecedented, I think. And the level of not only just kind of awareness of the issues, but activism, people really, really wanting to do things, you know. And it's been driven from the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and all these other points. I really, really am hopeful that the 100-year figure, the one that I hate so much, will certainly not be 3 figures by the time that I speak to you, hopefully next year.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think you have answered all of our questions, and that's been extremely enlightening and very positive discussion today. So yeah, thank you very much for taking the time, joining us today, and another happy International Women's Day also from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.